Hello and welcome to another edition of F12's Copilot for Microsoft 365 series, where we're bringing you demos and insights and information organizations need to know as they plan their implementation and adoption of Copilot within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. Now, the last couple of sessions we had delved into the security considerations and regulatory compliance considerations around Copilot. And then we had a really interesting session, which really went into the details, surprising to me, about the challenges of managing the security context within 365 and hence Copilot. And we explored some tools provided by our partner AvePoint that make what is almost an impossible task really quite simple and help us not only solve the challenge, but be able to put in policies in place to continue that. Now, security is not the only consideration when we think about our data and Copilot and making sure it's effective and accurate. We also need to think about data hygiene. So once again, I'm really happy to invite back to the F12 webcast series Miguel Caron, who is a veteran, as I said last time, not to provide stolen valor or anything, Miguel, but you've been in the IT industry for a very long time. Not only that, you've worked with AvePoint, Microsoft's largest partner in this space, which is all about how data moves within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, how we manage it, and how we can address all the challenges that we're talking about, which directly impact Copilot. So welcome back, Miguel. Happy to have you again today.
Thanks a lot, Ivan, and very happy to be back on this and continue this conversation.
Fantastic. All right. Well, without further ado, let's pick up where we are. We already have the security context covered. I know you've prepared some materials about data hygiene, so take us through them.
Sure. So let me share my screen with you guys. And please let me know when everything is properly shown here and displayed.
Looks perfect.
All right. So like we just mentioned, right? One of our previous webinars, we've talked about the AvePoint approach, a holistic approach about the Microsoft Copilot readiness assessment. And in another subsequent webinar, we covered in this approach here the step number 2. So just a quick summary of this. We're actually proposing to our partners an holistic approach of helping their customers get prepared before rolling out Microsoft 365 Copilot. We try to make it as simple as possible, although we know that there, in some cases, it is some kind of a challenging and large project ahead of them, but it's key for them to be able to roll out a successful Microsoft 365 Copilot. So simple approach, 3-step process. The first step is to prepare your Microsoft 365 environment. The second step is make sure that you're all in full control of the security and the compliance aspect of your Microsoft 365 environment. Once that is done, then we can move forward into a day-to-day or a full governance approach where you will maintain your Microsoft 365 environment in a good fashion, so that the constant utilization of Microsoft 365 Copilot is always, the information provided by it is always accurate and so forth. So really, we're not going to touch base on the third step at this point. I'll do mention some of the aspects of the third step, but we really, the customers and your customers need to go through steps number 1 and 2, and they're not in specific order. In fact, we did a webinar on the security before we actually addressed the prepare, but whatever order you're actually looking at these webinars, today we'll focus on the preparation, which is the step number 1. So centralize and enhance your data integrity.
And I'll just mention on that, McGill, if you don't mind, to encourage everyone to go back and watch that. But the important context here is the value of this exercise, because it might be the power of Copilot is the reason why you're getting your house in order, your data hygiene and your data security. But in fact, it's just because Copilot uses Microsoft 365. So the same work we're doing to improve Copilot actually has an effect across the 365 ecosystem, as we outlined in those previous sessions. So just wanted to make sure we have that context.
Yes, exactly. Thanks a lot, Devon, on this. So yeah, so prepare your data. There is a component where the centralizing portion of this really focuses on how centralizes your information into Microsoft 365. So we know that tons of customers have a lot of information spread all over the place. It's not all the information or key information is actually in Microsoft 365. The focus here is really about 365. So we know that in order to maybe bring some information into 365, there is like a migration portion part of this preparation to roll out Copilot. But on we're going to take talked about today is all about the data hygiene in Microsoft 365. So there are some customers that will prefer to do that data hygiene before actually bringing in the information in 365. Perfectly fine during a migration project. Some other customers might prefer just to bring everything in 365 period, and then we'll address that once everything is actually in 365. That's another approach as well. We're not saying one is better than the other. Both approaches are valid. AvePoint can actually help you in that journey, whatever the journey you want to take. In this case here, we're really going to focus in 365. Now, keep in mind that even though a migration project might have went through a data hygiene before, those customers might still have information in 365 there laying there for multiple years, right? So they might be cleaning out with the new data that's coming in, but what about the data that's already in there? It's been there for 3, 5, 10 years, almost in 365. So there are a lot of work to be done.
And that
And
that preparing and migrating the data is actually what F12 has worked with the tools of AvePoint for years now. So our clients might not know it, but if you had engaged F12 to help with your cloud transitions or cleanups and all the rest, we've been using the amazing and unique tools of AvePoint to accomplish that. Cat's
yeah.
out of the bag, McGill.
All right, cool. So a good example of this is during an executive meeting at Microsoft at the early launching, talking about the future launching about their HR Copilot. Some of the HR's executives that were there were all concerned about the fact that all the data needs to be secure. Nobody actually argued about that. But then they also brought up the point that, well, what about the information, although it's perfectly secure, what about the nature of that information and the relevancy of the information that will be brought back by a Copilot request? Maybe they're going to bring
Right.
back some HR policies that's been outdated for 5 years and we no longer take it, but based on the request to Copilot, that's the kind of information that will be actually sent out to the users leveraging Copilot. So that was a big concern at that point, and that's where we started talking about data hygiene in that regards. And that is the main challenge, right? Copilot output will be outdated and provide irrelevant results if you don't actually clean your data. So it might be a secure. You might have passed or taken multiple weeks, multiple months to make sure all your security and your compliance is all up to par and everything is seems to be perfect. But then the relevancy of the information coming out of there is completely outdated, and it just will create some all sorts of situations. Could it also leak some wrong information. A story that came to me not too long ago where someone in whatever company, they heard rumors about layoffs maybe or not too sure. And so someone actually put that request in about trying to get information about
Oh
layoffs.
my.
And what happened is it actually brought back information of the previous layoffs 4 years ago. And so they started reading this, and some people started panicking and all this. But
No
eventually, what
kidding.
happened is that was all false information. So then false rumors came out of
Oh my
this, and it just made
goodness.
internal chaos in that company. So
I mean,
it's a funny
that's an
story.
extreme example, but I'm just
Yeah,
thinking about, I know in our own HR folder, we've got our current version of our employee handbook and manual and policies and health. But for some reason, we've got folders with maybe a decade or two of previous outdated policies sort of floating around in PDFs that are maybe in a subfolder called old or maybe not, but it's incorrect and it's sitting there. And
right,
yeah, that's
exactly.
interesting.
So we can smile at that story because it didn't impact from our company or your company, Devon,
Oh,
but we
I
can know that it could happen to any of us, right? It's like, so how do you fix that? Well, that's all about trying to get access and identifying that rot information. So rot, just to make sure everybody understands, because I know there's so many acronyms in the IT industry, I always
are
like
there
to
ever
clarify, right? So redundant, obsolete, and trivial information. That's what rot means. Redundancy, we know
redundant, obsolete, trivial?
obsolete
Okay.
and trivial. All right.
Okay.
So redundant, duplication of information. We know that happens often. Greatest example, you're searching for certain information, you can't find it, you just do it again. You just created a redundancy, perhaps, right? Obsolete information, we just explained that story about the old layoffs thing. And then the trivial is all about information that you're keeping, but you don't even know why you're keeping it, because that actually you shouldn't even keep it, but you're keeping it for all sorts of reasons because there's no other way of doing things. You don't know how to figure it out. You don't know
Or
what to
because
do
it's
with
I'm
it.
just lazy and it takes too long to go
Just
through and
yeah,
delete it. Yeah.
yeah.
I just want
Why
to
not?
speak from a marketing perspective and in the role that I work with, that
Hmm.
redundant one is a super big challenge because here's how it goes in our organization. We create a new PowerPoint, perhaps presentation about one of our products or solutions. And here it is, and it's in a special spot. And then inevitably, different salespeople take that file and then they modify it. And then also our account managers might, and that's all great. But then we update the central one. But there's these other versions that are now in stasis in different spots.
Yes.
I have no idea where. And I sometimes find out and it makes me a little ill. 7 months later, I say, "What? You're not using that, are you? Like we don't. That's not. That's just
Right.
one small example of redundancy causing challenges."
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so the solution is really identifying or figuring out how can I identify those raw data based on some of the rules. So again, adaptability and flexibility of our solutions here enable us to propose to any customers their own rules. There are some basics, very similar, right? Like, oh, how can I find data that hasn't been touched for 5 years? That's basic, and probably a lot of companies will have similar to that. But then there's other things that we can also add to those set of rules, and we'll take a look at this in just a couple of minutes here. And then what's the outcome? Okay, I found all this. Now, what do I do with it? Right? So people, the first thing that they think lots of times is, okay, so we just delete this thing or this data. I can't do that. I'm not secure
Right.
deleting all this. So what's my alternative? Right? Well, what about archiving? Yeah, okay, archiving, but then how do I bring it back? Very easy, we have the options to propose the end users actually be able to retrieve archive data if that's what you want to do. It can also be an IT process that you can put in place, and the IT process can bring back archive data. There's no issue there. So it's not archived forever. It's not, and if it needs to be deleted, it can be deleted. It doesn't have to be the first approach. You can have a multi-stage approach. We see that a lot where data is kept for a number of years in archive mode, and then eventually after 5 years it's actually being distracted, but not just blindly. It's actually done through a visible process to the stakeholder. So we'll talk about all that. So that's
You know
really,
what? One
yeah,
example I think about that occurred to me as you were talking was when uh, employees of all ilk, but especially VIPs, leave an organization. We tend to take their emails and all of their files that they had, and we kind of put it in a directory because we just don't know, and somebody may need it someday.
yeah,
Now, if depending on the permissions, that might be exposed to Copilot, and I know you're going to get into that, but nobody's going through to see like what's private, secure, intellectual property,
exactly.
comments about the boss or anything that might
Yeah,
be
yeah,
within that whole.
yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
And how much time do I hear? Joe has left the company, so we're going to take his OneDrive and just copy it into Brian's OneDrive because
Oh,
Brian
so
was his
true.
manager, and
Yeah.
then just explode, and then and on like that. So there's tons of examples that we can talk
Yeah.
about it. All right, so let's move forward. So again, how can we make this like try to make it simple because we don't want to over complexify things. We try to make it simple. So the first step to this process is set your ROT criteria. Like I was saying, Work with your customer to review what those criteria could be, show them what is possible, and then work with them to identify what is a good approach for that specific customer. Each customer have their own ideas, and you can help them identify that. Once that is done, then put those rules in place, then scan that environment against those rules and see what happens. You're going to get some dashboards and results of this. At that point, steps 1 and 2, we're not modifying anything, we're not breaking anything, we're not moving anything. We're just telling you, if you go with these criterias, here's how much data that you can actually either destroy or archive.
I
So, and
see.
then if you're archiving, think about your storage, right? So we'll get into that in just a second. And then finally, the last stage is really decide, okay, here's what I found. Now, part of what I found, is there anything in there that actually is worth archiving? Then that's where you make your decision of saying, okay, this portion will be archived. These sets of data will just completely destroy them. We really don't need this. Or just archive everything and then just take those decisions further down the road.
And I think absent a tool, McGill, the expense of the number of human hours it would take to ask everybody in the organization to look through their stuff and try if they could to identify what's redundant.
Yeah.
It's actually, I don't, if you're probably a company that's got more than 20 employees, that's probably a Herculean task. And I'm also just thinking where the redundancies happen, because you have
Right.
your file, or I was just talking about, and in the previous sessions we covered how that could be shared in Teams, and then it could be shared on email, and it can be shared, and so it proliferates this data.
Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the larger it is, they're not going to do it. And that's probably the first thing that they're going to tell you is that no, we don't have time to do all this, and we're not going to
And they're
do it.
right. They're right,
And they're
because I
yeah,
can't imagine having time to do this. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So that's where you bring the automation in place. Well, let's say we could actually do it automatically for you, really, and then the interest picks up, and then you
Yeah.
can continue that conversation, right? And so part of that conversation is actually getting some of the key questions in place. So again, just like our last webinar on security, we're just proposing, some examples here of some initial question. Like for instance, how long has the customer been in 365? That's Microsoft 365. That's probably one of the first questions. If they've been there for about a year, maybe a year and a half or 2 years, there might not be at that point where information is exploding and all this. And if they're very recent in 365, they might not be ready for Copilot anyway. So think about that.
Fair enough.
What data is needed for compliance purposes? Have you identified where the rot data may reside? So if we look at the questions 1 to 5, the first approach is a discovery practice where have you identified this, and we can help you do this. We can help you and define what rot data is. And when you follow this journey here, when you get to step number 3, where a mature practice, that's where you start going into more of a governance kind of an approach where a lot of automation is in there. That's what question number 4, have you established areas where automation can play a major role? Because again, just like the security portion that we've covered in our previous webinar, this is sort of like a big bang approach where, okay, we're going to clean up this environment right now, but then I'll show you how you can actually continue maintaining this over the years and over the months, over the years, to make sure that we don't need to do a big bang again in 6 months or 1 year, whatnot. So that's where you get to mature practice and advanced practice and then leading practice.
Because absent that, I'm going to guess for most of us, since we're event driven, that next big bang cleanup will happen after something bad happened, like you were describing, like after that organization had somebody ask about layoffs. I
Yes.
bet they did it's the same thing with security. I think with data hygiene, we want to get ahead of the challenges to the extent
Yep.
possible, because you
Yep.
wind up doing the same work afterward, but it's more expensive in
Yeah.
every sense of the word, on people and reputation, and of course financial. So that's
Yep.
important.
Absolutely. All right. So without further ado, the next step, I really want to jump into the solution and show you the key areas. Obviously, we don't have time to go through a detailed approach, but the idea is to give you at least the big, the highlights in the summary, and then from there we can have some discussions with people from my team and some of the F12 folks, and then we could actually elaborate a little bit more. So what I'm showing right now is the AvePoint Online Services. So the Confidence Platform, Devon, is that what you're looking at right now?
I sure am. And in our last
Perfect.
session, we went through insights and policies. So anybody's curious about
Yes.
that, yeah,
Yeah,
another plug for the last
exactly.
session. Yeah.
Yeah, those two here. So today we're going to focus on Opus. Opus has multiple benefits of using Opus. The one that we're going to focus on is really about your raw data analysis. So clicking on this card will actually bring you to this screen here, the dashboard screen. So the first thing that we look at this, there's lots of data, and don't worry, we're not going to go through every single of these things because of the fact that the first dashboard that shows up is under the information lifecycle. So when we're talking about a mature approach, that's what we're saying. That's one example of automating your information lifecycle. So the things that I'm going to talk about under storage optimization, which is where we're going to focus, we are able to automate all that through automation lifecycle policies that we can put in place at a later stage. So think about storage optimization might be your big bang approach, but then the ongoing process afterwards, you're going to be doing this through the information lifecycle. So, maybe in the
Okay.
future webinar, we can cover what's underneath this one, but let's stick to the storage optimization, all about identifying raw data and then deciding what you want to do. So this first dashboard is really sort of like the result of using the storage optimization module. So what we're seeing here is archive data, not data to be archived. So
Okay.
let's think about this as this is already being used. So far we've archived 1.43 gigabytes of data. We've archived more than 4,400 files. And out of those files, we've identified 490 versions of files that are being currently archived for an annual cost saving. And that's another cool benefit. We show right from the start your cost savings in terms of storage. And I'll explain to you how we get to this later on in this presentation. At
And
the
I just want to
bottom,
add cost
yeah,
savings because people should also consider there's the cost savings of just the storage. Then there's the cost savings of your short-term backups. And then there's the cost savings of your long-term and iterative backups. Like the problem kind of snowballs a little bit when we think about unnecessary
good
data.
point. Good point. You're absolutely right. Yeah, there's multiple benefits to this. This is just one small piece of an iceberg that we're looking at. And that's great. I think a lot of companies and a lot of customers will love that. And then at the bottom, we're just showing the top 50 site collections with the most
Gotcha.
archived data. But before we get there, the first approach is, well, how do I identify what I need to archive or what potentially I could archive? And that's where we go into the discovery phase. Now, into discovery, it could take a lot of time to run. So we actually make sure that we set expectations about this, considering that the size of the
Right.
environment, that could take a long time. And then what do we scan for or about what? And that's where it comes interesting because as always, we're able to provide very flexible approach in terms of what type of rules that you're going to be using in this case. So in this example here, I'm just showing that we're going to analyze 10 items. 10 items being it could be multiple site collections, and we're going to stick to that. So the first approach is really select your scope. So it tells me that. Or I'm going to tell you that you don't need to scan your entire environment to start with. You can start with very, very
Okay.
specific areas that you want to concentrate on, and that's fine. So you can do this here. So you select your scope. Once that is done, there is some reporting threshold. I'm not going to go too much about this, but in other words, what it's saying, all the very small site collections or teams that we might have been identifying, we're not going to put those in the reports, in the dashboards, because they're it's not significant enough to actually have impact on what you're actually trying to find out. So that's what this is all about. When you go to the next step, which is the inactive data, that's where it becomes interesting. This is where you start building some of the rules that you want to look for. So when you want to know, okay, well, where do I start and what What is a rot data? Well, you tell me. I can tell you. Let me give you an example. Here's a great example. Modified greater than 2 years. So how does that build? Very easy. Give a name, a description, and then select your criterias. So in this example here is modified time older than 2 years. You rather have 4 years? Put 4 years. You want
Sure.
another criteria? Just add another criteria, and then
You can
just
do
build
and
those
or
rules.
here, so you can
Right.
get quite granular. Got it.
You can get
Yeah.
quite and creative as well. So that's one rule. You can have multiple rules and then just select the ones that you want to use. In this example here, the one I'm going to show you is using only that second one. Once you're done with this, you move on to the next phase, which is the rot data. So again, redundant, obsolete, and trivial. For each of these aspects, you can build very specific rules. So when you think about being very flexible, here's another example. What is duplicate? So let's take a look at that one very quickly. So duplicate is analyze duplicate files. So find duplicate files into a specific scope where the name and the size are identical. Now we're not going into inside the file and all that at this point. Is this something that we're going to do in the future? Potentially, because our tools evolve constantly. So we got to start somewhere and make it simple again. So name and size for that example. If we look at obsolete, I'm going quickly because there's lots of things that I
Yeah.
want to
Yeah. This
show
is
you.
great. This is great.
But just to show you how flexible and how creative we can come, like legacy pictures and zip files, legacy notes, other legacy files. And so if you look how we built one of this example, which is office
Okay.
files older than 6 months. So here's a combination of a couple of rules, right? Modified time older than 6 months, and the type of file has to match one of these. So these are all your standard office files, right? So that's why they call it the legacy office files as an
Right.
example. All of these are checked off, so they would actually be used in an analysis. And then the trivial files in custom folders. I like this one here. Cache recycled and archive files. So let's take a look at this one. And it actually goes into some of the parent folders or subfolders that we're not used to work with, like especially business users don't regularly see this, but as an IT pro, we actually know what these are in SharePoint, and they could hold a lot of data, which is used by the system but not by the users. So maybe we want to actually start cleaning that up as well
That's
and
really
reduce
interesting
their.
because I'm super familiar with the temp files and temp locations on my
Hmm.
profile, on our computers and our servers, but I hadn't
Yeah,
actually thought about it in the SharePoint environment.
yeah.
Like,
SharePoint
I
has a
don't think I've
lot of
ever
hidden stuff.
peeked in there. Yeah. Ah.
Yeah, because we don't see that. You need that. The only way to see some of these is either by programming or by specific admin tools that you go inside and take a look at it. So your standard users are not really going to see that,
Right.
but we have access to it. So why don't we use it? Files without extensions, Yvonne, have you ever heard about this? Like apparently people are able to create files with no extensions. People will always surprise me, honestly.
Yeah.
But we
You'd
have a
have to do
rule.
that pretty intentionally, you'd think.
Yeah, well,
Huh.
whatever, but we can actually analyze against this. So
Huh.
once this is all done, then you launch your analysis, which could take minutes, hours, days, honestly, and even weeks, depending on the size of your
Wow.
environment, right? So that needs to be discussed right from the start. But once this finishes, then you can start analyzing and taking a look at the dashboards. So here's the inactive data dashboard. So based on some of the rules that we saw, all right, we were able to detect 418 gigabytes in this demo environment, 187,000 files. The oldest file is
So
131 months old.
that's
Interesting.
11 over
That's
11
more than 10
years.
years, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's more
yeah.
than 11 years. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
crazy.
Yeah, version size, 6 gigabytes. PHL data size. Interesting. So PHL, for everybody listening to this, preservation hold library from Microsoft. So keep in
Okay.
mind that when you're using the DLP stuff from the Microsoft, right, some of that data will actually be moved into the preservation hold libraries, and those are actually counted against your storage. It was not before, but now
So,
it is.
so Miguel, I just want to explain that DLP is data loss prevention.
Mhm.
a lot of our clients are using the E series of Microsoft licensing, or perhaps Microsoft Business Premium if they have
Yep.
fewer than 300 employees, and there's some DLP, which F12. So again, this might be one of these things you're not even aware is happening in the
Exactly.
background. Yeah,
Exactly.
interesting.
So in this example here, it's very, not significant. One gigabyte out of 418. That's fine. But in some of your customers, that might be super large. Who knows, right? So
Yeah.
it's interesting to see this.
Well, that's the
The
point,
inact
is no one knows until you
right.
look, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So what am I seeing here? Well, based on these basic criteria that I see here, just the modified time range, out of those 418 gigabytes that I found, I can actually reduce my storage, or at least that what I feel is raw data or inactive data, sorry. I can cut that by 91% if I stick to 5 years to indefinite in terms of data size, right? So I can actually potentially archive 147,000 files out of those 187,000 that we found based on the analysis, based on the rules that we put in place. Just keep that
So
in
McGill,
mind.
let's forget about Copilot for a second. Just throw that out the window.
Right.
We're talking about now our storage
hmm
costs are going down.
hmm
I'm
hmm
also thinking about our environment, our searching, et cetera, would be faster, and our employees are having to wade through less irrelevant results in their searching and in their wandering through folders and files. Like the benefits just for data hygiene are pretty massive for any organization that's been around for a few years.
Absolutely. It's not just for Copilot. It's like you're addressing a ton of issues, a ton of concerns. Imagine if you're able to clean your data and just like you say, forget about Copilot. Now, if I go in SharePoint and start searching, what are the chances now that I find more relevant information? Pretty high compared to what it is today, honestly. At least my
Yeah,
rate
and
of
you might not have
success.
Copilot yet, but you might have new
Right.
employee, let's call him Carl. And Carl's trying
Yeah.
to find the answer to something and he
Yeah.
doesn't know. Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Right, exactly. So now you can play around with this here. So if I modify this and go to 3 years or older, suddenly I move up to 92%, obviously, because
Right.
then and that's what you would expect, right? And the number of files increases and so forth. So you have a good idea here. Then here it's classified by either containers, or if you rather take a look at the site collection view, you can take a look at the site collection view. So each site collections is in here, how much data size that we found, how many files are in there. So if you want to focus on a specific site collection, because when you start looking at this, you might find that 3 site collections hold about 90% of what that data with that potential data could be archived. Only 3 site collections. So maybe you focus there first, right? And then address the other ones later on. So that's how you can view this here. And then the data size by gigabyte by file size. So how many files are large? And so most of the files here, 373 gigs of files, are files that are larger or equal to 1 megabyte, but smaller than 50 megabyte here. And then what kind of files? So in this environment, which is funny because it's a demo environment, it doesn't really show the reality, but imagine that this here might be Word documents, or maybe if you're an engineering firm, maybe it's drawings or CAD files that you would show up here, that it would show up here. So that's your largest group of file types in gigabyte size. So the log files in this environment count for 358 gigabytes of the entire environment. So we could actually clean up just the log files,
You know,
and we've
I've seen this happen, McGill, the log file situation in ordinary organizations where there's some application and maybe debug got turned on or it's doing something, and unbeknownst to anyone, it's
Mhm.
just creating gigabytes after gigabytes of logs, and no
Yeah,
one knows.
yeah,
Nobody's
exactly.
doing it, or they didn't mean to. That's a good
Uh-huh.
example. Yeah.
Uh-huh. So this is just inactive data. Now, if you want to take an action based on what you're seeing here, very easy. You go to inactive data optimization, put back the filters that you felt are the ones that you want to address first. Select the scope, or just select everything if you want. But let's say we select this scope here, which contains 12 site collections, according to what I'm reading here. And then suddenly this button shows up, archive or destroy. Now, if I do this only on this container, I'm addressing 58%
Gotcha.
of the information that was discovered. And a quick math that I did not too long ago, 58% of potential archiving information could end up in saving about close to 50% of your entire storage cost, which includes the cost of using this solution. So it's really beneficial here. So if I click on this button, again, I could actually be more creative and filter out some things from
I
here.
see.
You can also, if you want to be very specific, you can say specific files and versions. I could also include different rot rules or inactive rules right from here. I don't need to go back and redo an analysis. I can actually create some new rules here. They will be part of these drop-down lists that we're seeing here. I can do that here. And then is, okay, the information that I find, okay, what do I do with it? What's my outcome? So here are the potential outcomes that you can actually do. I can archive and remove the files from the source. That's it.
Yeah.
I can also do the same with the versions from the source. I could also leave a stub in place. So here's a key element here. If I'm archiving information, now the old way of the old mindset of archiving, think about it. We archive information, it's gone. If I search for it, I don't see
You
it.
won't find it. Yeah.
Even in the old days, in the physical archiving, you would go back to your cabinet and suddenly an entire folder would have been disappeared. You ask the stakeholders, oh, it's been archived, it's actually been moved to whatever facility, and it's there. You need it? Okay, we'll need to recover it back. So with the electronic information, there's an option to say, well, why don't we leave just a little trace so at least users can find it, and when they click on it, they'll get information. The Word document that you're looking for, the PowerPoint document that you're
Oh,
looking
I see.
for,
It's
has
been
been
moved.
archived. Yeah, has been
Yeah.
archived on this specific date. Here are all the metadata related to this file. And then what's
I see.
interesting with our solution, eventually, when you start maturing about this, you could actually put in there an hyperlink where the end user could actually ask to restore it right from there. So no more IT intervention. Of course, there could be some workflows behind the scene go and where the IT will need to approve it, totally fine. But when I talk about all these nice features, that's more in your mature approach. In this case here, what you would probably prefer is maybe just put an information stack which says the information has been archived that you're looking for. Please contact this user or this department, and if you need to restore it. But again, if you prefer to put that in the hands of the end users, I'm telling you that it is possible to have the end users go through a restore process.
That is very handy.
Where will that locate? Where will that data be archived? Is it going to be archived somewhere in AvePoint, somewhere in Microsoft? Where, well, so you see that there's a drop down here, which
Yeah.
means that we can configure whatever location you prefer. If it's your own Windows Azure location, then we could actually do that. If you want to have AvePoint Windows Azure location, we can supply the storage just like Archivex or any was that other Iron Mountain would provide storage facility. We could provide
Yeah.
the same. So it really depends on what the customers
Or
want to do.
to an on-demand tape library. And I think people think, well,
Yeah,
I'm keeping the data. Where's the savings? But the reality is you pay for different tiers of storage. So you want a fast, expensive storage for performance for the
yes,
data you're using all the time. The
yeah,
data you're not can actually go on really low cost storage.
yeah. What we call
And
cold
that's the
storage.
advantage.
Yeah,
Cold storage, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And that's why the pricing is cheaper, obviously, because it's less performant. Because technically speaking, archived information, you should not have restore requests every single day. If you have restore requests every single day, then maybe you didn't archive the correct information, and
Sure. Yeah.
that data might be still relevant to most of your employees. So that's why it's very important to make sure that you understand what archiving is and the rules that are behind it need to make sense and need to be in that thinking.
What a
That
nice compliance piece this automatically provides, though. If you take
yeah,
like all employees, all former employees, if you had a rule that are out of the company for 12 months or whatever it is, now it's archived. If anybody needs to access that data, there's a log now. There's a request being created. They have to, et cetera. So now you can demonstrate your governance. This is how we treat former client data, former employee data, all financial information, and that's very helpful.
Right, exactly. And so at the bottom here, we see as soon as I save this, I can run it immediately, or I can put this on the scheduling. Now, one might ask, okay, this is a one time, but what about if we want to do this on a regular basis? Yes, absolutely. But I keep saying what we're showing today is like a big bang approach. So you do it once. If you want to do this on a regular basis, that's where we need to sit down and start talking about a real information lifecycle management best practice. And then we're going to continue leveraging Opus. But that first tab that I showed you earlier, information lifecycle,
Gotcha.
that's where we're going to spend more time. And then we'll be able to automate all this. That's what's interesting. And we're able to automate this based on what we're doing here. So it's nothing that we're doing here is lost. So this is all about inactive data. We have the same approach with the raw data. Again, what was found, some criteria that we can use here, how many files. It'll start talking about how much percentage are you saving in terms of storage, in terms of costs. And here at the bottom here, we have different types of reports. So based on what we've discovered, we can actually split this into the three main concepts of redundancy, obsolete, trivial. Now, keep in mind that the total sometimes might confuse people because one single file can be all three, can be redundant, can be obsolete, and can be
Oh, okay.
trivial. Okay,
Sure.
so keep that in mind.
Okay.
But then you can circle this. You can click on some of those, and say you want to actually just archive only the legacy nodes that were found, so only this 2 GB, you can just do that. You can just select it right here. It will give you the type of documents that were found, so 3 gigs of PDF files and 1 gig of TXT or text files. If you prefer to go with the legacy Office files, well, then you can click on this, and out of those 5 gigs, we'll have 6 that are Word documents, PowerPoints, Excel files, and so forth. And again, you have it per container or per site collection, the view that you want to use. And with the same with inactive data, if you move to the raw data optimization, this is where you can provide some of the filters that you discovered based on your discovery. And then let's select another one, a container, and then you have the same button that shows up here, archive or destroy. And then again, it's very much the same approach that I just explained to you a few moments ago. So that's your big bang approach. You start cleaning information, and I would just want to quickly show one thing. If you want to have a view of, because money talks, about the storage savings that you might have, on this button here, you're able to configure the storage pricing. Now, it's
Right.
not the AvePoint pricing. It's not whoever's pricing. It's your customer's pricing. So
Sure.
based on the license subscription that they have with Microsoft, you put the correct numbers in here for both SharePoint and OneDrive, and then also the correct pricing from AvePoint. So I believe this is the standard list price. So you can actually talk with some of the sales folks at AvePoint to get some different numbers, and then that's how we actually calculate the cost. So when we first open this webinar on this storage optimization page, this is where this number comes from. It's based on metrics that were supplied by your
I see.
customers. So it's
Not
not inventions.
fictitious. Yeah.
No,
Very good.
no, this could be the real thing, the real numbers. So that's what we wanted to show today. I hope it wasn't too too quick, too confusing. But
Oh, it's great,
storage
Mikhail.
optimization, first approach, a big bang approach to clean your environment. Once that is done, then we could start talking about the information lifecycle to maintain this over time.
Yeah, I mean, this is really helpful, and I obviously, I was talking as we were going about all of the ways in which this helps an organization writ large. But I just want to go back to what started this conversation, which is Copilot will only analyze and provide information back on the information that has access to. And if there's confusing or inaccurate or old data, then that is the information it will provide. And that can sometimes be humorous, but it can sometimes be damaging. And
Pretty dramatic.
especially,
Yeah.
yeah, and we have to think that it's not, we have some big dramatic examples, but also our employees might be using Copilot prompts to provide answers to customers or to vendors or etc. And we just don't want inaccurate information. And we also don't want to do this all manually. I'm reminded of an old IT adage, garbage in, garbage out. So this is all about reducing the garbage, right? Making things cleaner. Hygiene.
Exactly.
McGill, this was a really terrific series to discuss Copilot's security challenges, data hygiene challenges, but also how we can solve them with automation with the help of tools and partnership through AvePoint. Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome.